My stepmother believed she had finally triumphed when Dad passed away. After 5 years of no communication, I was abruptly deemed unfit to attend the well reading. However, Dad always had 3 steps ahead of him. Diana's expression when I set those property deeds on the table? Priceless. According to the lawyer, this conference is just for heirs. Spreading the papers. I grinned. Are you referring to the ones I already have prior to delving into this incredible tale of inheritance? Tell me in the comments where you're viewing from. If you like sweet revenge and family drama, to read more amazing, genuine stories, click the like button and subscribe. Let's now discuss how I overcame my avaricious step family. It was a soggy Tuesday morning in Singapore when the call came in. I was in the process of concluding a significant development agreement when a number I hadn't seen in years appeared on my phone. When my childhood friend Grace broke the news that would alter everything, her voice cracked. Your father died last night. Maxwell, 5 years. I had not been in Maplewood, the little town where I grew up, for so long. After a heated dispute with my father 5 years ago, I packed my bags and flew to Asia with the intention of establishing my own reputation in the global real estate development industry. I was going home now as a sorrowful stranger, not the prodigal son. The cab arrived at the expansive Victorian home where I had grown up. I was hit by a flood of memories. The basketball hoop where I learned how to shoot from my dad, long into summer evenings. We discussed business plans on the porch swing. When I was 10 years old, we buried my mother in this garden. In some way, everything appeared smaller, as if the size had been exaggerated by my memories. Diana's silver Mercedes and 2 other high-end cars were parked in the driveway. I was unaware that my father had always favored his vintage Cadillac, reliable and pragmatic, inconspicuous, similar to him. I stood at the bottom of the stairs after giving the driver my money. Before I could reach for the doorbell, my suitcase felt heavier than it had at the airport. Its front door opened. Brittany, my stepsister, was standing there. Her eyes were hidden under a well-crafted mask of solemn politeness. Maxwell? She remarked in a monotone voice. We had doubts that you would attend. He's my dad, I said plainly. I walked into the house that no longer seemed like home after she moved aside to let me in. Diana's favorite ultramodern design, complete with glass and chrome and uncomfortable-looking furniture, had been used to redesign the entryway. There was no sign of Dad's love of old leather and warm woods. Mothers, Tyler, and a few visitors are in the living room. Without offering to take my suitcase, Brittany led the way and told me Diana, who I dimly recognized when she saw me, was sitting on a white leather sofa, holding court among a group of town residents. After registering shock, her flawlessly painted face swiftly rearranged itself into the expression of a heartbroken widow. She rose to the air and said, Maxwell. Give me a cheek kiss. How unexpected. Naturally, we attempted to contact you, but your phone number had changed. No, it hadn't. I'm sorry you lost someone. Knowing the dance we were going to do, I expressed that in a formal manner. What time is the funeral at 2 tomorrow? Without trying to rise out of his splayed position in an armchair, my stepbrother Tyler interrupted. All of the preparations have been made without my input. The message was unambiguous. Here. I wasn't desired or required. Diana continued. Your old room is now being used for storage. However, the guest room can be made up for you. I nodded, suddenly relieved to be free of the burden of ominous looks. By then, I should be situated. Diana's honey-sweet, poison-undertoned voice shouted after me as I turned to leave. The estate matters are being handled by Harold Stevenson. In the morning, he will be here to talk about some papers. Only you understand. Family, I got it exactly. The will reading was specifically excluding me. Later, I was sitting on the back porch, gazing at the ancient oak tree where my dad and I had constructed a treehouse when I was 8 years old. When Grace discovered me, she sat next to me and added, They've been terrible, Max, ever since Richard became ill. They have been behaving as though they already control the town. Diana has been discussing the sale of homes in meetings with developers. She said that Grace had stayed in Maplewood to manage her family's hardware store and had grown up next door. Over the past year, my father's health has gradually deteriorated. Details I had never heard Diana bother to tell me. Your father inquired about you. Silently. Grace said, always. He maintained the features of your worldwide magazine in his office. My chest knot grew tighter. He still has his office. Was Grace right last week? Diana packed everything up and transferred it all to storage. She replaced the door's locks. With my thoughts racing, I thanked Grace for stopping by and went back inside. The guest room was just what I had anticipated, cold and impersonal, without my history or possessions. I heard noises coming from a corridor as I was unpacking. We may proceed with the selling of the riverfront property as soon as Harold verifies the will tomorrow. Lawrence has already made an offer, Diana said. How about Maxwell Tyler inquired. Do you think he will cause trouble? Diana gave a harsh laugh. What are you able to do? Richard left us everything. Maxwell's decision to leave his father was his own. My hands were shaking with grief and rage as I perched on the edge of the bed. Despite our disagreements, Dad left me. After I called for months after leaving, Diana informed me that he was either too busy or didn't want to talk to me. I would eventually give up trying. I couldn't sleep that night, so I went around the house and the library. Some of my old books were still on the shelves. I discovered The Count of Monte Cristo, my favorite, was taken down. On my 16th birthday, my father gave it to me, writing to Maxwell. Always keep in mind that preparation and patience pay off in the end. An envelope slipped out and dropped to the ground as I turned the pages of the yellowed book. It contained a letter dated only 3 months ago, written in my father's characteristic handwriting. I'm probably gone. Maxwell. If you're reading this. Diana is unaware of the preparations I've made or this letter. First National Box number 247 has a safety deposit box. The Monte Cristo artwork at my office has the key affixed to the back. You should know that I always had a strategy, regardless of your opinion of me. Dad. My heart is racing. I headed to my father's office. There was a lock on the door, as Grace had stated. However, I recalled that Dad always had an extra key for the loose floorboard in the hallway. There are some things that never change. The room had been stripped naked inside. No books, no documents, no personal belongings. However, the artworks were remained displayed on the wall. I took it out slowly and discovered the tiny key. Dad said it would be right there. I made the decision to go to Harold Stevenson's office and the bank tomorrow. Now was the moment to discover just what my father had been up to. I had to learn about real estate before I could ride a bike since I was Richard Harrison's son growing up. Some fathers taught baseball to their children. I learned how to determine property values and identify a poor foundation from a distance of 100 yards thanks to my... For 3 years, it was just Dad and me against the world when my mother passed away from cancer when I was 10. We worked as a group. I was learning all he taught me in preparation for taking over Harrison Properties in the future. Diana Winters then entered our life. She was lovely, endearing, and appeared to sincerely love Dad. When they got married, I was 13, young enough to hope for a new family, yet old enough to be cautious. Diana's prior marriage produced 2 children. Tyler was 2 years younger than me, and Brittany was my age. Things were fine for a time. Not very good, but passable. What mattered to me was that Diana made Dad happy. However, things started to shift gradually. I took a seat farther away from Dad at the dinner table. He rescheduled our weekend property visits to fit with Brittany's dance recitals or Tyler's soccer matches, room by room. Diana began to redecorate the house, removing all reminders of my mother. Maxwell, you have to give them a chance. Whenever I grumbled, Dad would say, they are now family. I had essentially been marginalized in my own house by the time I was 16. Diana pretended to be Dad's business confidant and would go with him to networking events and meetings that I used to go to. Dad was overjoyed when Tyler suddenly became interested in real estate. In spite of this, the business allowed Dad and I to stay connected. Dad's life worked for Harrison Properties, a business that owned and operated about 30% of the commercial real estate in Maplewood and the neighboring districts. When my parents first got married, they bought a single apartment complex, but now they have a multi-million-dollar business. Maxwell, property is permanence. Dad used to say that while money fluctuates, land and buildings are permanent. They endure. Those remarks resonated with me. Attending college to study real estate and business, I gained knowledge of every facet of Harrison Properties operations throughout my summer employment, including development, management, and maintenance. I was prepared to take on a leadership role by the time I graduated. Everything broke apart at that point. Dad had been working on a big project to rebuild downtown Maplewood, a mixed-use riverfront development. Together, we had worked on the designs for months, but when I came back from a trip looking into comparable developments in other places, I found that important changes had been made without consulting me. Diana and I believed that better results would come from a more upscale strategy. When I challenged Dad, he stated that the luxury condos would sell more quickly than the mixed-income housing you had suggested. I disagreed with that vision. We discussed developing something that would not only help the wealthy, but the entire town. Son, he replied, sometimes you have to be practical. Diana has great intuition about these topics. The dispute got more heated. I accused him of preferring his new family above me and of eschewing our shared beliefs in favor of Diana's materialistic worldview, which led to 5 years of animosity. He said I was idealistic and unyielding. At last, he replied, perhaps you're not prepared for this degree of responsibility. Maybe you should wait to join the company's leadership until you've matured a bit. The final straw was that, after a college acquaintance offered me a job in his growing company, I packed my bags that evening and boarded a trip to Singapore. I made a commitment to demonstrate my ability to succeed on my own terms, which I did. I established a reputation for creative, community-focused development initiatives throughout Southeast Asia over the course of the following 5 years. International business periodicals published my work. I received recognition for my environmental design. I earned more than I could afford. However, my father and I were still at odds. Holiday greetings replaced monthly calls, and finally there were none left. He knew how to get in touch with me. I told myself, he had tried, but Diana had snagged his attempts. According to what Grace had told me when I got back, I went to First National Bank the morning after I got to Maplewood. When the safety deposit box opened, I found just what I had hoped for. A USB device, property deeds, and a folder containing legal paperwork. I quickly located a coffee shop and connected the drive to my laptop. He started by saying, it contained a video file dated 6 months ago that looked thin and pale on screen, so different from the robust man I remembered Maxwell. You found my letter, and I'm gone. If you're viewing this, I must first apologize. My biggest regret is letting Diana get in the way of our relationship. However, I want you to know that I have continued to think about your future. He clarified that he had been covertly giving me direct ownership of important Harrison Properties assets for the last 3 years. The downtown business block is owned by the Riverside Development. All of the apartment buildings on Maple Street had been formally transferred to me via a number of trusts and transfers intended to reduce any potential tax ramifications. Diana is unaware, he added. I became aware that she had more control over me than was healthy after your quarrel. I could see her setting Tyler up to take control. Despite his inexperience and lack of sincere desire, I couldn't allow all that I had created and all that I desired for you to go wasted. 2 years ago, my father received a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. He had organized his affairs in the short time allotted, collaborating with Franklin Ross, an old friend and business associate, to safeguard his legacy. In the video, Dodd cautioned that the will reading would be challenging. Diana wants to be in charge of everything. The official will gives her enough money to support her lifestyle, along with the property and a few accounts. However, you already own the majority of the company's assets. Franklin knows every detail. My father was seen staring straight at the camera as the film drew to a close. Son, I'm proud of what you've done. Come home now and complete the task we began together. As the television went dark, I sat in startled stillness with tears running down my cheeks. Dad had been defending me and our common goal all these time, and I hadn't supported him when he most needed me. I called Franklin Ross and set up a meeting at his office after gathering my thoughts. My father had been friends with the rough-and-tumble older man since college, and he had always been good to me. He gave me a bear embrace when I got there. "It's about time you arrived," he said. "Even after he was gone, your father was concerned that you wouldn't return." Everything in the video was verified by Franklin. Through a number of channels, including gifts and sales at low prices, Dad had lawfully given me ownership of the most valuable Harrison properties. All of them are fully enforceable and lawful. Franklin warned Diana that she would be enraged. Controlling those assets has been the foundation of her strategy. She is already discussing the sale of the Riverside home with Lawrence Blackwood. Dad's old business competitor, Lawrence Blackwood, was a developer who specialized in pricey, shoddy buildings. I was furious at the idea of his hands touching my father's meticulously put-together portfolio. How about the will? "Are you reading?" I inquired. Franklin's face grew serious. "For years, Harold Stevenson has been Diana's pawn. To prevent suspicion, your dad kept him on as the family lawyer, but he didn't trust him with the true plan. Diana has made it obvious that you are not welcome, and Harold set the reading for this afternoon." I reached into my briefcase and fingered the property deeds. "Oh, I suppose I'll go anyhow." Franklin grinned like a wolf. This would have delighted Richard. "You always had his flair for the dramatic moment," he added. I was more aware of my father's presence as I walked out of his office than I had been since I had returned to Maplewood. I wouldn't fail him since he had trusted me with his legacy. They had underestimated both Harrison men, and Diana and her kids were about to find out. For 20 years, Margaret Wilson served as my father's executive assistant. She was well informed about Maplewood and Harrison properties. Her face brightened up with real delight when I entered the company's offices that morning. She said, "Maxwell Harrison," getting up from her desk to give me a hug. "I hoped you would attend." The offices were now different, sleeker, colder, the decor clearly influenced by Diana, with its neat filing cabinets and family photos including, I noted with a pen, a few of me that Dad must have kept her stocked with throughout the years. Margaret's domain, nevertheless, remained a reassuring relic. Margaret whispered, "Your father wanted me to give you this," and slipped me another USB drive. He forced me to agree not to mail it or leave it anywhere it might be discovered, but to give it to you in person. I thanked her and inquired about the state of the business. Margaret's face became agitated. Since Diana took power, things have changed. Workforce reductions and cost-cutting initiatives. She brought in Tyler and consultants who have no idea how your father operated things. She spoke more softly. Despite having been appointed vice president, Tyler seldom ever turns up. And when he does, he takes choices that reverse years of meticulous preparation. Carefully avoiding disclosing what I already knew from the documents and my discussion with Franklin, I inquired about particular projects and properties. My suspicions were validated by Margaret's responses. Diana had been methodically getting ready to destroy my father's painstakingly constructed empire in order to get quick cash. According to Margaret, the Riverside development has undergone a comprehensive renovation. Luxury condos and upscale shopping have taken the place of your father's idea for a neighborhood with reasonably priced housing. Next month, construction will be taken over by Lawrence Blackwood's company. I requested to view my father's office before I left. Margaret paused. Last week, Diana had it removed because she required room for the new marketing staff. I still want to watch it. The space that had once been occupied by my father. Now, his books, maps, and collection of old photos of the area were all in ruins. I had a new sense of purpose as I stood there. My inheritance was not the only thing at stake here. It has to do with upholding my father's Maplewood ideal. I located a park close by and a peaceful spot to look at the contents of the second USB device. There were more videos in this one. As he walked around different estates, my father talked about their importance and his aspirations for them. During the final year of his life, he had jotted down these intimate messages, forming a comprehensive blueprint of his vision. In one recording, he stated that the Riverside project is the most crucial. This could change Maplewood, provide housing and possibilities for everyone, not just the wealthy, and take place on the vacant riverfront land that had been the focus of our last disagreement. Diana is unaware that a town cannot prosper without economic variety. I know you'll take good care of this property, which is why I've transferred it to you. He appeared exhausted but resolute as he sat in his office in another video. Maxwell, I've been observing your work in Asia, Malaysia's sustainable home development, Vietnam's mixed-use project. What I taught you has been enhanced by you. Regarding the path we ought to have taken, you are correct. Diana's emphasis on wealth and prestige influenced me too readily. After watching all the films, I fully understood not only what my father had taught me, but also why he had shielded his most important projects from Diana's influence to ensure that they would be completed in accordance with his original plan. The ideal we once had in common. James Patterson, the accountant who had managed my father's personal money for many years, was the next person I was scheduled to see. In his tiny office in the heart of downtown, James gave me a cordial but wary greeting. He said, "I've been expecting you," and he firmly shut the door after me. "I was instructed by your father to help you when you got back." James described the intricate financial plans my father had established. In addition to transferring title of the land, he also created Harrison Legacy Holdings, a distinct company entity, of which I am the sole proprietor. James showed me flowcharts and balance sheets on paper and emphasized that the structure is really elegant. Diana thinks she will inherit the Harrison properties, but the business is now only a shell. Over the course of 3 years, a number of completely lawful transactions have transferred the significant assets to Harrison Legacy Holdings. Was Diana left with nothing by her father? Despite all, I asked with a tinge of worry. James gave a headshake. She owns the family house. Some investing accounts have significant sums. Some of the commercial properties will continue to provide revenue for her. By no means will she be penniless, not in charge of the empire, though she felt she was getting. To confirm my legal status, I called and reviewed paperwork for the remainder of the morning. By midday, I felt secure in my role. The deeds to the property were legitimate. The business transfers were submitted in the correct format, regardless of what his formal will would indicate. My father had carefully made sure that his intentions would be followed. I was both anxious and determined as I got ready for the will reading that was set for 200 p.m. for years. Diana and her kids had been trying to get me out of my father's life because they believed it would protect their future. They were unaware of what was about to happen. I put on my finest suit, which was charcoal gray, and wore a delicate blue tie that my father had given me years before going to Harold Stevenson's law office. I arranged the important documents I would need in my briefcase, including property deeds, business registration paperwork, transfer records, and proof of my father's genuine intentions. I called Grace one last time. Since my return, she had been my closest confidant, and I appreciated her advice on how to approach the impending encounter. Diana has been telling everyone that you are undeserving and that you abandoned your father. I was warned by Grace. She has been perfecting the role of the loyal wife. Theatrics are to be expected. I don't want to make her feel bad, I said. All I want to do is respect my father's desires. Grace says nothing, spoke at a high volume. All okay. I change it. I might want to make her feel a little less respectable. Grace chuckled. She is deserving. Max, your father wasn't pleased with the past few years. You were missed by him. He wants you to return home and take your proper place, no matter what happens today. Those words gave me more courage. Prepared to confront the family that had attempted to remove me from my father's heritage, I went to Harold Stevenson's office, the entire top floor of a modest 4-story building in the heart of Maple Woods. One of the town's few high-rise buildings was devoted to Harold Stevenson's law office. In reality, the building had belonged to my father, but I questioned whether Harold was aware that I had taken possession 6 months prior. I took a moment to gather myself in the foyer before arriving 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Diana and her kids were unaware that this conflict had been building for years. Still, when I introduced myself, the receptionist appeared surprised. "I'll check with Mr. Stevenson, Mr. Harrison." She vanished down the corridor and reappeared a few moments later with Harold looking agitated. For 20 years, Harold Stevenson had been my father's lawyer. When I was 18, he wrote my first rule. When I purchased my first investment property at the age of 21, I had taken care of the paperwork. But suddenly he looked at me as if I were a stranger. Even worse, an intruder. "Maxwell," he said, without reaching out. "This is not what was intended. This meeting is merely a modest family get-together to talk over preliminary issues." "I'm family," I said plainly. "Actually, the only blood related of my father." Harold was clearly uncomfortable. "Diana believed that your alienation would be the wisest course of action. Maybe we could set up a different meeting to talk about any worries you may have. I'll be at the meeting today." I spoke aggressively. "Should we?" I moved by him and toward the conference room, where I could hear voices without waiting for an answer. I pushed open the door, and Harold rushed after me, almost tripping in his hurry. Suddenly there was no more talk within. My father would have been seated at the head of the table, but Diana took his place. Brittany and Tyler flanked her like courtiers, both dressed in sophisticated black that matched her ash blonde hair. There were few others there. Dad's banker, Diana's cousin, who had never been fond of me, and a man I knew as the lawyer for Lawrence Blackwood. Diana was the first to recover. "Maxwell. This is unexpected." It sounded like it wasn't a nice tone. "To hear my father's will, I came." I replied as I sat down across from her. Harold lingered at the entrance, unsure. "Diana. I had no idea Maxwell would be coming." Diana's face is toughened and flawlessly put up. "This meeting is exclusively for heirs," she stated icily. "Years ago. Maxwell distanced himself from this family. I remained silent, just taking out a folder of papers from my briefcase. "I believe we ought to start," Harold replied as he sat down and organized his papers. "The reading of Richard Harrison's final will and testament is the reason we're here." Harold started to read the official legal preamble. I looked at the faces at the table. Diana wore a mask of solemn respect, using a lace handkerchief to dab at her dry eyes every now and then. Tyler kept looking at his watch as he stared forward. Brittany was the only one who displayed true emotion. She had puffy, red-rimmed eyes. To Diana, my wife. Harold, read, "I depart from 247 Maple Avenue, where our family resides. The contents of it, plus $2 million. Diana gave a nod as though she had anticipated this. She didn't appear startled or really appreciative. I noted, obviously, this was the very least she had expected. "I bequeath my collection of first edition books and $1 million to my stepdaughter, Brittany." At this last part, Brittany looked up in amazement. My father had taken great delight in his collection of books, built with care over many years. I was also taken aback. Even though this didn't fit the plans my dad had given me, I kept quiet and waited for Tyler, my stepson. I leave my collection of vintage cars and $1 million. Tyler grinned. The value of Dad's automobiles was high. The value of the 1965 Mustang alone exceeded $100,000. Harold went on to include Harrison Properties and all related assets as part of my business interests. With a triumphant glitter in her eye, I let Diana straighten up. Maxwell Harrison, my son. Deathly silence fell over the room. Diana then made a harsh, incredulous noise. She stated that was not possible. Richard's will was altered. It was 2 years ago. I was present. Harold appeared really uneasy. 6 months ago. A codicil was filed. He acknowledged it. It undid the earlier modifications. Anger made Diana's face flush. You didn't bring this up. It wasn't until yesterday that I realized it. Weakly, Harold remarked. Richard filed it directly with the court. The official copy arrived yesterday afternoon. Diana dismissed it, saying it didn't matter. I've been managing Harrison Property for the past year, and the assets are what count. Maxwell's leadership can never be accepted by the board because he disregarded his duties. I had been waiting for this time. I slid the property deeds nearer the center of the table so that everyone could view them. These are the deeds to 12 important properties, including the Maple Street apartments, the downtown commercial block, and the Riverside development land. You'll see they're all in my name, I said coolly. Been for a while. Diana grabbed the documents. She turned through them, her hands trembling. These have to be fakes. They're not. I said, over the last 3 years, Dad has lawfully transferred ownership to me. You can check with the office of the county recorder. Are you referring to the homes I now own, without resisting the dramatic flourish my father would have liked? I added. Then Tyler leaped up. After 5 years, you cannot simply return and take everything. I refuse to take anything. I gave a fair response. I'm asserting what is rightfully mine, what my father want for me. Diana's face was now ashen instead of rosy. Is this legal? Harold, is he capable of doing this? Harold nodded grudgingly as he studied printouts of the deeds, his face astonished. The transfers seemed to be valid. These properties would not be included in the inheritance if Richard had signed them over while he was still living. Harrison Properties, Diana insisted. According to Maxwell, the will wins the business. Harold, looking more and more dejected, clarified that the properties are the company's main assets. The business itself is a shell if Maxwell already owns the properties. For him, I completed. Last year, I also created Harrison Legacy Holdings, giving the new company operational responsibility over all of these properties. The only owner is me. Chaos broke out in the room. Tyler was yelling that the will should be contested. Diana threatened to sue Harold and everyone else. Brittany sat quietly, her face blank as she watched me. I spoke again when Diana finally lost her temper. I spoke quietly, yet firmly. Diana, your father left you with a stable income. The house, properties, investments, and a little income. He created Harrison Estates out of thin air. Yet he wasn't spiteful. He also wished to preserve its heritage. He was aware that you intended to sell it off in pieces. Diana snarled. You're not entitled. His wife was me. I looked after him when you were out in Asia playing developer. I replied I wanted to return. Months after I left, I continued to call. He didn't want to talk to me. You told me. Diana's face briefly flashed with remorse before she covered it up. He felt let down by you. So why did he abandon me all that was important to him? I posed a challenge. Why did he spend the final years of his life devising a complex scheme to guarantee that I would continue his work? For the first time, Brittany spoke. Is it accurate? Did Mom prevent you from speaking with your father? I nodded before Diana could say anything else. Yes, based on his letters and videos. He made several attempts to contact me. Videos. Panic rose in Diana's voice, which videos I gave my briefcase a pat. Dad was meticulous. He kept a record of everything. His choices, his justifications,
and his aspirations for Maple Woods and the company's future.
Diana, he was fully aware of your plans. The Lawrence Blackwood transaction, the opulent condominiums by the river, everything. Harold cleared his throat. Maybe we should call it a day. There may be legal issues that need to be addressed, and this is a lot to process. I concur, I remarked, getting up and collecting my papers. Regarding the transfer of operational authority for the properties, my lawyers will get in contact.
Please don't make any further business decisions without my consent in the meanwhile, Diana called after me as I turned to go. Her tone was poisonous. Maxwell, this is not over. Toward the end, your father was not in his right mind. We will challenge everything. I stopped at the entrance. Feel free to give it a try. However, Dad didn't simply abandon me and go with Diana.
He told me the truth. Do you really want it to be made public as I left? The menace lingered in the air. Even though my heart was racing, I was walking lighter than I had in years. I had done what my father had asked. The difficult phase was about to begin, restoring the things Diana had attempted to destroy and realizing the goal my father and I had once discussed. In a small town like ours, Maplewood was a hive of rumor the morning after the wall reading. News spread more quickly than the internet. Old-timers who had known my father for decades gave me a number of congratulatory nods and a dozen strange looks by the time I stopped into Bernard's bakery for coffee. Bernard gave me a cinnamon roll on the house and remarked, "Your dad would be mighty pleased." When Diana sold everything to strangers, many were concerned about what would happen to the community. After thanking him, I sat down near the window and listened to Main Street's well-known beat. In 5 years, Maplewood had changed less than I had. The street is lined with the same stores. At the end of the square was the same courthouse. Despite Diana's best efforts to recreate it in her own image, the same sense of community remained. Uninvited, Grace moved onto the seat across from me and joined me. She stole a slice of my cinnamon roll and added, "You're the talk of the town. Diana is warning anyone who would listen that you will be seen in court for manipulating your father in his last days. Give it a shot." I answered, "Dad kept a record of everything. When he made these plans, he was in good physical and mental health." Grace's face became serious. "Max, exercise caution. Lawrence Blackwood is upset over losing the Riverside contract, and Diana has many powerful allies." Franklin Ross arrived and pulled up a chair without asking, saving me from having to answer. "Kids, good morning," he said. However, both Grace and I were in our 30s. I hear that was quite a spectacle yesterday. I told him everything, even Diana's threats of legal action. Franklin ignored this unusual bravado. She is aware of her weak legal standing, but that doesn't mean she won't cause trouble. "What sort of issue?" I inquired. "Kind of the community." Franklin said, "In this town, Diana has been accumulating social capital for the past 5 years. Business associations, charity boards, etc. She has persuaded many people that her plan for the development of Maple Woods is the best one." I retorted that selling Lawrence Blackwood everything is hardly a vision. As Grace noted, people are unaware of that aspect. They only see the glossy depictions of upscale restaurants and shopping by the river. They have no idea how it might affect the town's character or house prices. I met with important Harrison Properties staff members for the remainder of the day to reassure them about their roles and my goals for the business. Most appeared to be relieved. Those who had aligned themselves with Diana were notably frigid, despite the fact that her management style had supposedly featured a lot of threats to terminate people. I had a thorough picture of the company's present situation because Margaret had arranged the files I needed to analyze. It wasn't attractive. Reserves of cash had been exhausted. Property maintenance had been put off at below market prices. A number of important land lots had been prepped for speedy sales. She was stealing parts from the business. If you hadn't returned when you did, the consequences were obvious. Margaret stated plainly, had Diana lived a few more months, my father's legacy might have suffered irreversible harm. I went back to the house that night, Diana's home. However, I was still legally residing in the guest room until I was able to find more permanent housing. It had a glacial vibe. When our paths crossed in the corridor, Diana, who had withdrawn to the master suite, came out to stare at me. Tyler slammed doors and muttered threats in an overtly angry manner. However, I was taken aback when Brittany cautiously knocked on my door after supper. "Can we have a conversation, uncomfortable but resolute?" she asked. I asked her to come in, wondering what she desired. I had never been close to Brittany. We had never been direct opponents, but she had followed her mother's example of keeping me out of family events from the start. Uncomfortably. She sat on a chair's edge. After a brief pause, she replied, "I wanted to apologize for how things went with Dad, with Richard." When she used his name instead of Dad, I arched an eyebrow. "Your father was always him." "More than ours," she said. Tyler feigned interest in the company, but it was all a front. All he wanted was the money and the prestige. "How about you?" I inquired. Brittany let out a sigh. "All I wanted was a family. I assumed that after Mom married Richard, we would all be a single, contented family. However, she was always placing Tyler, pushing, and excluding you. I didn't know how to stop it, but it made me uneasy. I was still suspicious, but her confession looked sincere." "You told me this now, but why since I discovered anything?" Taking a little notebook out of her pocket, she said, "I wanted to know what Dad had said after the wall reading." Richard had a lot on his mind. I then looked through some of his belongings that his mother had stored. She gave the journal to me. It was my father's notebook for the previous year, in which he wrote about his family, his illness, and the business. He also expressed regret for our separation and his mounting worries about Diana's influence. Brittany muttered quietly that he wasn't happy. He was beginning to see through his mother's tactics, and he missed you. As I turned the pages, I recognized my father's handwriting and his frank evaluations. Diana's meetings with Lawrence Blackwood and her attempts to keep Richard away from former acquaintances were covered in great detail in the notes. She was also under pressure to change. "Is your mother aware that you possess this?" I inquired. Brittany gave a head shake. "I felt you should have it. But she would be upset. It supports your statement that your father wants you to take control when you get home." I examined her face for indications of dishonesty. "Why show it to me?" she added plainly. "You're essentially giving me ammunition against your mother because it's the right thing to do. In addition, I wish to remain in Maplewood. I adore this town. I don't want a family conflict or Mom's plots to ruin it." Shouting came from downstairs before I could answer. When we rushed down, we discovered Tyler and Diana arguing angrily with a stranger who looked a lot like my father. "You're not entitled to be here." Diana was speaking in a high-pitched voice. "You were never acknowledged by Richard." The woman's face changed as she saw me on the stairs. She said, "You must be Maxwell. My name is Alice." "Alice." "Thornton?" I had no idea that Richard was the father of my half-sister. "There have been a lot of bombshells this week." "That is untrue." Diana made a frantic attempt to get money. Alice gave a headshake. "Money is not what I want. For years. Richard and I were together, at my wish, private. I simply came to meet my brother and offer my respects." Her eyes were very similar to my father's as she held out a hand to me, cautious but optimistic. I accepted it, sensing that yet more element had been added to the puzzle of Richard Harrison's life. "We appear to have a lot to discuss." Diana gave a disgusted sound. "I refuse to see this nonsense from here. Hurry up." "Tyler." She bounded out. Tyler was following her. After hesitating, Brittany stealthily left, leaving me by myself with a sibling I had no idea I had. Alice gave a hesitant smile. "I didn't think our first meeting would go like this." "This week has not gone at all as planned," I laughed regretfully in response. "But if you don't mind, I'd like to know about you and your relationship with your father." Alice started telling me about her mother's brief relationship with my father prior to his meeting my mother when we moved into the living room. How her father had accepted her into his life while tactfully honoring her desire for privacy, and how she had learned she was her father as an adult. "He was always talking about you," she continued. "Despite how much he missed you, he was quite proud of what you were doing in Asia." I had a wave of gratitude and sadness as Alice talked. I'm saddened by my father's passing and thankful that, in spite of Diana's meddling, he managed to preserve his legacy. Given the communal divisions Franklin had forewarned about and Diana's promised lawsuits, the path ahead would be difficult. However, I was more committed than ever to upholding my father's intentions for Maplewood and Harrison properties. My phone buzzed with a text from an unidentified number later that evening when I was in the guest room going over business documents. Lawrence Blackwood was the one. "We must speak. It's not over yet." As I gazed at the message, I realized that the fight for Maplewood's future and my father's legacy was only getting started. There was a lot going on in the weeks after the will reading. Together with Margaret, I formally assumed control of Harrison Properties while evaluating the damage. Diana had created a strategy for her recuperation. After months of Diana's unstable administration, the staff mostly came together to support me, relieved to have clear leadership once more. As we went over the revised business strategy, Margaret informed me your father would be proud. "The business is in dire need of this firm hand." My reappearance did not sit well with everyone. In protest, a number of board members who had sided with Diana quit. A public relations campaign was started by Lawrence Blackwood, who implied that an absentee heir couldn't possibly comprehend Maplewoods' needs the way his development business did. Diana's own actions were the most unexpected development. She abruptly asked to meet in her lawyer's office after weeks of posturing and threats. Franklin cautioned. When I explained it to him, Diana only makes accommodative gestures when she has a point. Curious about what she could have to offer that might be of interest to me, I consented to meet her, in order to provide moral support. Grayson insisted on sitting with me in the foyer as I spoke with Diana and her lawyer. Diana was flawless as always, yet there was a brittleness to her flawless image that had not previously existed. The previous month's stress had worn them down. Without introducing herself, she remarked, "I would like to suggest a settlement." Her lawyer, a sardonic woman I didn't recognize, put a contract on the table between us to prevent expensive litigation and public humiliation. In return for operational control of the Riverside Development Project, Mrs. Harrison is prepared to renounce all claims against the estate and property transfers. I almost burst out laughing. The portfolio's most valuable property. A settlement is not what that is. It's a heist. Diana argued that it was my idea. Richard and I spent years working on the plans. My vision is that project. Long before you were involved, Dad had this vision. It was a luxury. And I corrected her. Boutiques and condominiums. It included local companies, public areas, and reasonably priced housing. Diana's facade gave apart a little. Maxwell. Maplewood must change. The traditional methods are becoming obsolete. Toward the end, Richard realized that. Did he? With my phone out and a video of Dad playing the one in which he made it clear that Diana didn't comprehend his actual plan for the Riverside property, I questioned. Anger made Diana's face flush. He was ill, perplexed. He was sensible enough to give me formal ownership of his most valuable possessions. I made note of the reason he was doing it. Diana stormed out of the meeting after it came to a standstill, and her lawyer promised to take additional legal action. However, as the weeks went by, there was no lawsuit. Diana's lawyers had told her that her stance was legally untenable, according to Franklin's sources. In the meantime, I had been getting to know Alice, my half-sister. Alice had no interest in the family company, in contrast to Diana's children. She was an environmental science professor at a Colorado institution who was enthusiastic about sustainability and conservation. I got ideas from our discussions about how to integrate sustainable architecture and green areas into the riverbank development, Alice remarked. Dad would have loved that. When I presented my revised project vision, Environmental projects always piqued his interest, but Diana dissuaded him from doing so since she thought they were too expensive. Brittany had turned into an unanticipated helper throughout the changeover. By relocating to an apartment downtown and providing her mother with crucial insights into her business activities, she had disassociated herself from Diana's schemes. During one of our frequent coffee dates, Mom told me that she has been selling jewelry, artwork, and even some of her high-end furniture as part of her efforts to liquidate her personal assets. I believe she intends to move out of Maplewood. Tyler was still antagonistic, but he was becoming more and more alone. As word spread that he was involved in some of Diana's more dubious business dealings, his acquaintances in town had started to turn away. When I presented my updated ideas for the Riverside development to the town council, it was the actual turning point. A mixed-use development with inexpensive housing spaces for local enterprises, a community center, and wide public access to the seaside replaced Diana's upscale condos and upscale stores. My father had originally envisioned this development. I presented a project that would help everyone in Maplewood, not just the privileged few, to the crowded meeting room. Naturally, Lawrence Blackwood was there with his own glitzy facade and assurances of tax income from his upscale construction. However, his concept rapidly lost momentum as locals started to raise concerns about public access and housing affordability. Grace argued from the crowd that the Harrison plan allows for progress while maintaining Maplewoods' character. We become merely another playground for the wealthy under the Blackwood plan. Lawrence and Diana's hopes for Maplewood's future were severely damaged when the council unanimously approved my proposal. Lawrence came up to me as I was leaving the meeting, his face solemn but resigned.
He said, "You win this round, Harrison. However, I have a lot more experience in this industry than you have. I'm able to wait. Alternately, you could adjust. I mentioned that your business could fit within my development plan if you're prepared to operate inside the framework that is community-focused." The offer appeared to stun Lawrence. Why would you recommend that I acknowledge that you're good at what you do in spite of everything?
Additionally, Dad used to say that a clever businessman may succeed by doing good. That evening, we were unable to come to a consensus, but the door had been opened. Sometimes unexpected paths lead to reconciliation. The last altercation with Diana took place in the garden of the house that had been our family's home, not in a courtroom. When I went there one evening to gather my final possessions before relocating to my own home, I discovered her. She seemed older and smaller than I remembered when she noticed me, seated on a stone bench close to my mother's rose bushes. I expected her to lash out, but she didn't. "I'm going out of Maplewood, Bamay," she declared plainly. "I can no longer find anything here." I sat next to her, keeping a cautious distance. "Where are you going?" "Returning to Connecticut. There's my sister." She gave me a sidelong glance. "You've prevailed, Maxwell. The town and the company back it. Even the loyalty of my daughter. Are you happy?" Not all of the question was sour. There was real interest in it. Winning was never the goal. After a time, I said, "The goal was to pay tribute to Dad's legacy. About treating Maplewood with respect." Diana was silent for a while. After he departed, he changed. "At last," she said, growing more aloof and intent on his tasks. I believed that we would become closer if I became involved in the company. After that, "Did you taste it?" I recommended. She didn't dispute it. "Maxwell, I'm not sorry for desiring security. If you have ever been left without anything in your life, you will stop at nothing to ensure that it doesn't happen again." I considered the complicated woman at my side. Yes, manipulative and materialistic, but also influenced by her personal experiences and anxieties. Your father left you a stable income, the investments, the house. It has little to do with it, so you didn't have to strive to take everything. Her response was very candid. "But it's finished now." She straightened her shoulders and stood. "I've told my lawyer to drop all challenges to the property transfers and will
I want you to respect the arrangements my father made for my kids and me in exchange. I had no intention of disputing those, I reassured her. After we concluded our relationship in a professional manner, she nodded. Maxwell, goodbye. I don't think we'll cross paths again. I had an odd mixture of relief and regret as Diana left, rather than elation. When Dad remarried, I had hoped for a family, but it had never come to pass. However, new relationships with Alice, Brittany, and the Maplewood community, which had welcomed me home, had taken its place. I met with the Harrison Properties team the following morning to formally introduce the Riverside Development Project. I could feel my father's presence as I glanced around the conference room at the excited expressions of everyone, including Brittany, who had just started working in the marketing department. Property, according to my father, is permanence. What we create here will outlast all of us, I assured the staff. Therefore, let's ensure that Maplewood may take pride in it for many years to come. Grace came smiling at me as the meeting came to an end. Max, your father would be very proud. I gave a nod. For the first time since coming back to Maplewood, I felt at ease. I believe you would, and this is only the beginning, in my opinion. I stood on the recently built observation deck with a view of the Riverside development a year after I returned to Maplewood. The first phase of structures was already beginning to take shape on what had been empty terrain, which was now a busy construction site. Nearer the ocean, the groundwork was being done for the community center and local business incubator, while mixed-income housing units bordered a central open space.
Franklin joined me at the railing and remarked, "That's quite a view." This would have delighted Richard. I gave a nod. Considering my father's original plan for this land and how it had nearly changed completely, I hope you get to see it. He is able to... Franklin only indicated a bronze plaque that we had put up at the development's entrance. The project's focal point would be Richard Harrison Memorial Park, guaranteeing that my father's contribution to Maplewood would live on, for Harrison Properties as well as for me personally. The last year had been revolutionary. In order to interact with the community as a developer and a citizen with an interest in its future, I had to establish roots in a way that I had avoided for years after taking over my father's business. Alice told me, looking at her tablet as she came over, that the scholarship committee had accepted all 15 applications 6 months prior. My half-sister had relocated to Maplewood to assist in the founding of the Richard Harrison Foundation, which offered educational opportunities to local students with an interest in community planning and sustainable development. Perfect, I said, adding that the internship program will begin the following month. 3 colleges have already partnered with us. Alice was now a vital part of my existence, closing the distance that separates my past and present. I heard stories about our father from her. I was unaware of his covert environmental advocacy and his unnamed assistance to underprivileged college students, mentoring young business owners. At one point, Alice said, he never wanted recognition. All he wanted to do was improve the situation. In keeping with that, I had steered Harrison Properties in the direction of growth that struck a balance between community benefit and profit. Not everything was simple. Our more progressive proposals were regularly met with resistance from Lawrence Blackwood and his business council allies, but we were making headway. Unexpectedly, Brittany was frequently the one who assisted in navigating these political seas. Brittany had a deep awareness of the social dynamics of Maplewood, having grown up witnessing Diana's charm and manipulation of the town's culture. At the council meeting the following week, Lawrence intends to speak out against the extension of affordable housing. As we made our way back to the office, she cautioned me. Behind the scenes, he has been lobbying council members. Any recommendations? I inquired, recognizing the importance of her strategic thinking. Brittany grinned. Residents from the first phase are already scheduled to come and tell their stories. Lawrence may disagree with us, but he cannot argue with families who, as a result of the development, now have stable housing. Margaret was ready with a stack of documents that needed my signature when I returned to Harrison Properties headquarters. These included the last documents cutting Diana's last ties to the business, in return for a one-time payment She had consented to sell her minority stake. "Has she gotten back to you?" Margaret inquired while I was signing the paperwork. I said, "Not directly." Brittany claims to be living in Greenwich and to have remarried. She is apparently working redefining herself as a humanitarian and has joined the board of an art museum. I no longer felt animosity against Diana, in the same way that my father had ultimately done in accordance with his nature by making sure his legacy would be preserved. She had acted in accordance with hers. The Richard Harrison I believed I knew was not as complicated as the man I had learned about from his films, notebooks, and other people's stories. More foresighted and strategic. More understanding of human frailties. As I returned the signed papers, Margaret reminded me that you had supper with Grace at 7. Remember that by tomorrow. The historical organization needs an explanation about the ancient mill land. I thanked her and went to my office, which was my father's old office that I had made somewhat livable again. With my personal touches added, the secret key was long gone, but the painting of Monte Cristo remained in its original location. In addition to pictures of my dad and myself, the shelves now have pictures of Alice, Brittany, Grace, and other significant individuals in my life. A plain framed note that had been part of my father's personal belongings was the most significant contribution. Legacy is permanent, but property is not. And everyone is wealthy. I had also reconciled with Tyler. In a way of talking, he had finally approached me with a business proposal after months of animosity. In one of the downtown Harrison Properties buildings, he intended to open an upscale eatery. I had offered advantageous leasing conditions, defying Margaret's counsel. "He's going to mess it up," Margaret said grimly. Despite his lack of work ethic, Tyler's restaurant has surprisingly succeeded. Diana had reportedly always discouraged him from pursuing his passion in the culinary arts, believing it to be beneath their social standing. We had made a polite agreement, but we would never be close. Over the river, the sun started to set. I gave the memorial scholarship named for my mother one last call to see how it was progressing. One of my initial efforts had been this. After taking over the business, a fund was established for young women who wanted to work in architecture. The unrealized dream of my mother. Next April, the first beneficiaries will graduate. The administrator of the program told me that they are already inquiring about Harrison Properties' internship opportunities. I hung up and thought about how much I had changed since that wet day in Singapore when I learned of my father's passing. I was sad and enraged when I got back to Maplewood, determined to get what was mine. That purpose had evolved into something more significant at some point, honoring not only my inheritance but also the duty that accompanied it. Reading my dramatic moment of setting the property deeds on the table during the altercation at the well, it seems like a lifetime ago now. Yes, it had been satisfying, but what occurred after was what truly made me happy. The community grew stronger and the bonds were restored. The legacies were protected. Grace was at our favorite restaurant, waiting for me. The closer I got, the warmer her smile. Over the past year, our friendship had grown stronger and steadily transformed into something more. She had supported me during the turbulent change, my guide to the Maplewood that had developed while I was away, and ultimately my business and life partner. The view from Riverside is breathtaking. As we sat down at our table, I told her, "From up there, you should be able to watch the sunset." She said, "Show me after dinner." I nodded and made plans to deliver champagne right away. Waiting for the right opportunity. The ring I bought last week was burning a hole in my wallet while we savored our dinner. I started reflecting on the path that had led me to this point. Property deeds and business assets were only a small portion of the bequest I had battled for. It was an opportunity to make peace with my past, make new friends, and build something significant on the groundwork my father had laid. It had been significant that I had presented the real estate deeds in a dramatic manner at the well reading. The vision and ideals my father had established in me were the genuine inheritance, even though they had granted me legal control over his legacy, even throughout our years apart. The lessons I learned about community and accountability influenced the way I approached development. That had never made sense to Diana. She had viewed the company as a source of prestige and fortune, and the properties as assets to be leveraged. My father had lived his life with a deeper purpose that she had missed. After dinner, as Grace and I strolled hand in hand along the riverbank in the encroaching dusk, I was overcome with appreciation for my father's vision. For the chance to create something that will outlast me. For the second chance to fit in at Maplewood. "What's on your mind?" Grace inquired, observing my reflective state. I answered, "Legacy is what we leave behind and how we're remembered." She squeezed my hand. "What you've accomplished here would make your father proud." "What are you doing now?" I gave a nod, recalling the multifaceted, flawless, and ultimately affectionate father I had learned to know more in death than I occasionally had in life. He had erred, all of us did. Ultimately, though, he had done his best to safeguard what was most important. Upon arriving at the observation platform, we had a view of the project that will shape Maplewood's future. It was time. I knew. My heart was light, but the ring box felt heavy in my pocket. I was right where I was supposed to be, no matter what happened. Establishing my own legacy while carrying on my father's. How about you? Have you ever had to defend your rights against those who attempted to exploit you? Or have you had to decide between justice and reconciliation at some point in your life? Please share your stories in the comments section below. For more true stories that will inspire you to consider legacy, family, and the important things in life, remember to subscribe and like this video if you liked this tale of inheritance, drama, and family salvation. Thank you for watching, and keep in mind that often the most priceless inheritance isn't money or real estate, but rather the principles and ideals that have been carried down through the ages.